Okay, so I'm going to talk about some books that I've read that, for me, has changed my professional life, and each of them expanded my horizon, so to speak, and kind of gave me a different perspective on how I should view my career. So hopefully this will be useful to you. I don't expect you to read all of the recommendations. Hopefully, if there's any one of them that piques your interest, it will be worthwhile for you to pursue further. Very quickly, just for those of you who don't know, my background is fairly varied. I've worked in a lot of big and small companies. I've played a lot of different roles: product manager, engineer, architect, sales engineer, project manager, a whole bunch of different stuff, and across a few domains. And while I wouldn't say that my background is necessarily unique, it is fairly broad, and it's probably not obvious how I got to where I currently am within my career. And as I thought about it, a lot of the key inflection points were actually seeded by a lot of the ideas I've picked up in these books. Just to give you a very quick overview of the progression of the books, there's only about 6 of them. I'll talk about each of them briefly, but they start out with just software engineering and best practices, then going on to productivity and then being a software manager. Next step is logical and rational thinking, and then a book covering organizations and how they learn, and finally a book on personal success limitation. So the first book, The Pragmatic Programmer, was a book that I've read early in my career when I was a software engineer, and it really changed how I thought about programming. After reading this book, I came to appreciate software engineering as a craft. So the subtitle here, From Journeyman to Master, is actually very appropriate, and it talks about essentially pride in your work and kind of quality, and why it's important. Some of this is a little bit dated. Some sections of, for example, it talks about learning VI and Emacs, and you can still learn it, but I wouldn't say that it's as important today as it was when this book was written. But overall, I would highly recommend reading this book. It's a very short book, and it packs a lot of lessons that some of the best engineers I've worked with share. The next book is one that I've read as I first transitioned into engineering management, and this one opened up my perspective of what being an engineering manager actually means. So prior to this, my assumption was, okay, well, I've been a tech lead. I can lead a team, but this book helped me realize that a software manager doesn't manage software. A software manager manages people. So a lot of this book is about the aspects that make a software team productive and efficient, and what keeps them motivated. So if you're an engineer who is thinking about management, or a tech lead who is thinking about transitioning to be a manager, this book will give you a perspective of the types of issues that you would be concerned about as an engineering manager. So highly recommended. So the next book is not software. It's more about the fundamental principles of maximizing production. And while the book uses manufacturing as an example, really it could apply to any type of work where you have a production line and a chain of dependencies. What was eye-opening about this book is that a lot of what I thought was conventional wisdom about maximizing efficiency is actually counterproductive to what you actually want, which is maximizing production throughput. I'd say this book was the first book to plant the seed of the importance of holistic thinking and global optimization versus local optimization. What's nice about this book is also it's written in a novel format, so it's actually a lot easier to read. The author uses an entertaining story to illustrate the principles that he's trying to convey. For those of you who've worked with Lee Tucker on a theory of constraints and current reality tree, this book was actually the one of the first books that introduced the concept of theory of constraints. So if you want to kind of see the origins of that, this is actually a good book to read and pick up. The next book is actually the sequel to this book. So whereas the first book was about maximizing throughput in a production line, this one is more abstract. And this one actually takes you from the specific example of manufacturing and basically applies it to strategy. So what are the thinking processes that help you maximize strategic outcomes? what are the constraints that limit the strategy from being successful. And the reason why this book was so impactful to me was it shows a process by which you can make your thinking and reasoning explicit rather than implicit. A lot of the challenges in communication and conflicts that happen in an organization is a result of people making assumptions and not having the right context and talking past each other. This book illustrates how you can counteract that, but more importantly, it gives you a tool to check your own thinking. The fifth book, coincidentally, is called The Fifth Discipline. And this book actually helped me put together what I picked up from the previous book and apply it to the organization as a whole. So this book really helped me understand what organizations are, how they operate, and systemic patterns that limit an organization. Individuals can learn and they can develop and they can improve themselves, but organizations can as well. And this book talks about the aspects that make organizational learning possible. This is a pretty thick book and it covers a lot of ground, but if you want to understand how organizations behave and some of the pitfalls that they commonly fall into, this is a book that covers it at a very fundamental level. Okay, last but not least, this is probably the most humbling book I've read in my life. I'll tell you the story of how I came across this book. I actually saw it displayed at an airport bookstore, and when I first saw the title, I wasn't actually thinking about myself. I was thinking about the CEO of a company that I've worked at. And while I really respected that CEO, I also had a lot of frustrations with them. And it seemed to me back then, perhaps naively, that the company was being limited by the CEO's limitations. So I actually picked up this book thinking, okay, well, I'll read this book and I'll hand it to my CEO and this will change everything. What I didn't expect as I read through this book was, this book was really talking about me and my own career. The crux of it is that some of the characteristics that make people successful in the careers actually limit them when they reach a certain level. And this is pretty interesting because if you consider yourself successful in your career, you probably have qualities that help you get there and which you don't question. These qualities then become your blind spots. And if you don't understand these blind spots, and if you can see them obviously, it's going to be hard to help you get to that next level. So if there was one book that I would recommend out of the set, I would recommend this one definitely. And finally, I want to leave you with a quote from a book that I didn't include in this list, but this quote I found very compelling and very motivational. Never forget, this very moment we can change our lives. There never was a moment, and never will be, when we are without the power to alter our destiny. This second, we can turn the tables on resistance. This second, we can sit down and do our work. This book was actually a book that talks about writer's block or the creative block, but I think this quote applies generally in life. Okay, hopefully you guys found that set of book recommendations interesting. If not, no worries, we'll talk about a tech topic again with the next update. All right, thanks so much.